Okay, we start in 3, 2, 1. We believe when such a huge wrong is being caused to innocent families, it is a moral and practical obligation of the state to actually jeopardize, give money back to those families in order to allow them have some sort of a better life and some sort of regrouping after the huge suffering that we have caused them. It does not matter if the administration is changed during this time, because we as a state have this obligation anyways, regardless of who is the administration at this current time. Now, for the mechanism, we believe that we do want to give them a decent amount of money, the one that will allow them an honorable life. Let's say, for example, I don't know, enough money to buy a house or something that give them a reasonable and honest life to try to regroup themselves and move on. Now, what are we talking about? What actually happened? So during the administration of Trump, those families that being caught crossing the borders are being separated from one another and being held in different locations for months. Now, this caused them a huge wrong that, let me just try to describe to you what those families been through. They've been through many months and time being separated from each other, being in just deep anxiety of the future or the life. They've been worried sick about the safety of their family members, and they had no idea how they're going to continue tomorrow. They had no idea nothing about their future, and they've been kept in this uncertainty for such a long time that in a very deep disorder and stress that we definitely believed that it caused them enormous mental harm for the future, that this money cannot fix, but at least we can do some sort of right with those family and at least give them something so they can keep rebuilding their life. Now, because the administration caused them this huge harm and this huge wrong, we believe that it is an obligation that the administration have toward those family to try to make right with them. Why is that? First of all, we believe that the USA have an obligation as a very key and maybe the biggest leader of our free world, the biggest conscience of our free democracy, and those events have also been media and showed in all of the television, all of the news. So there was a lot of criticism towards those actions, and therefore justice have to be seen and not just be done. And we have to try to give those families something back, also not just to let them reestablish their life, but moreover to just stand for what the USA is all about and to place them as the key leader that they are, and just to make their state more I will figure out how to say it later. But moreover, we believe that this amount of money is actually very available to the US because there is shitload of money in this administration, right? And it's not such a big deal to give those refugees this amount of money, especially when we owe them to them, because we are the one that caused them the harm that I earlier stated. I will take POI from closing.
Do you believe that the USA should compensate every immigrant that tried to immigrate and got locked up or didn't succeed?
I don't believe that every immigrant we should give them a repayment, but this is a special case, right? Because as I explained earlier, there's not just immigrants that try to cross the border and we just block them and push them back to their home country. We actually separated families from one another. This is a huge difference, because when you think about it, especially when you're talking about the Mishpacha Garinit, to not see your parents, to not know what's happening with your children, this is a crucial mental state that you are in for months. And this is very much like being captive in a way, because you are literally worried to death. And you are traumatized by this experiment, and therefore we do not believe that every immigrant had those kind of events happening to him, but those specific family actually did, and this is why we need to give them this money that I suggested earlier. Before I continue, can I have also opening if there's something? No. Okay. Okay, so I will move on. So what we are saying? We're saying that because we do have an obligation, by now I just talk about the obligation we have practically toward those family, because we have made it basically very hard for them to reestablish to their normal life, because now, well, of course, they are immigrants, this is just their status, but now they also have this trauma and emotional problem that actually making it harder for them to establish their family, not worrying about being separated again, find suitable jobs to actually function on a daily basis. Those are all very normal actions that it's harder for you to do when you are traumatized and when you been through such a terrible experience, when we don't think it's very different from actually being under war or being captive or being traumatized in any other way. And we believe that people that been through those experiments are having a harder time to get used to normal life again and to reestablish their life financially. But moreover, this is the practical part, but moreover, morally, it is, especially for the US, we are not third world country, right? We are the US, we are the biggest democracy in the world, and therefore we have a special obligation towards those families, especially because we have caused them such enormous wrong that is really not suited to the values that we are present and the values that we are stand for. So to sum up, we have an obligation both practically and morally to support those families, especially because we cause them a very unsymmetrical and unique harm. Beg you to support.
I thank the Prime Minister for her speech. I'm glad to call for the Leader of the Opposition, Hail Hail. Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Just a moment. Okay. Okay. Great.
Ball.
Starting in 3, 2. We think that the Biden administration is first and foremost obligated to law, obligated to the legal contracts that we have with citizens and with our community, and is obligated to the mandate of the people, the democratic mandate that he gave both to Biden and both to Trump before him. 3 points in this. First, what is the criteria? When do we pay settlements and how it is found here? 2, legitimacy about deterrence and repayment in current, and 3, legitimacy about the mandate of the people. Before I continue, a few remarks. First, we get this framing from OG that this will be money that really will help those immigrants in life later, and it will be like a lot of money for them, etc. And we don't understand why this framing is likely. We think the opposite. We think that in those settlements, they are created in order to settle this specific argument, this disagreement. It's for like a specific event. Therefore, we don't think it's settlements that are meant to help their whole life in the long term later, but only to settle this disagreement. Therefore, we don't think that you will be able to improve their life much better. Besides that, you will just need to give like more analysis on how it is likely you will use the money wisely later. 2, we get from OG that money is available in the US and it is no big deal. So we think that if you have money, even if you have a lot of it, you are still obligated to use it for your citizens and for the life of your citizens that you are responsible for, way more than immigrants from other countries that are try to immigrate in a non-legal way. But besides this, we think that specifically this budget, which is like for immigrants, the US is way more responsible to give it to the immigrants that are actually citizens in the country. Then we get from OG that we owe them because we caused them to be in this. Two rebuttals for that. First, we think that we're not responsible for their initial state. Yeah, those are immigrants from other countries that are in poor state. We think that the US isn't responsible for what happens in Mexico, but to what happens economically there, and it is not responsible to intervene in their economical system in order to change or save something. Two, we think that we just have legitimacy in this case to cause them this state because they did something that is illegal, but this will be in my points. So first point about the criteria and when do we pay settlements? So we think that we pay settlements when there is a legal contract that is violated. For example, if there's an employment contract, so let's say I was supposed to work during this period, I had a constant job and a wage, then I got fired, so I get the settlements paid. Why is that so? Because we think that when one side violated some legal contract, we need to repay because this one side harmed something that the other side paid for or expected for or something like that. More examples like when people commit crimes, and this crime is not only against society but as a whole, but also to a specific victim, so they pay settlements. Now, we think that those immigrants had free choice of the consequences, yeah? Like immigrants from Mexico or from other countries in South America. So we think that first they knew three reasons for that. First, they knew that it is illegal. They knew they are supposed to do so, and they need to request to immigrate. Two, we think that they had a choice. Yeah, they're not like a third world country. They can hand in this immigration request and wait for a few months. We think that in the comparative, it's likely for them to just be held at the border in this period. So we don't understand what's so different. And they have other options for them. Three, we think that the immigrants know what are the opinions of Trump's government perception. So they could expect those consequences. They know that this is the contract. Therefore, we think that there is no violation of any legal contract or social contract. Yeah, they were informed of that. And therefore, we think that there's just no justification to pay settlements for them in that case. So this is not just we can not pay the settlements. We think that there is no justification, legal justification to do that. Third point, no, this is my second point. Okay, second point about legitimacy in deterrence and repayment. So we think that there is a justification for holding people that are illegal immigrants at the border and dividing between age groups and between those families. Why? We think that first there is just holding people at the border, first repayment, yeah? There is some economical harm from immigrants that are immigrating not in a legal way because the state needs to expect for that. It needs to have some reforms in order to integrate those immigrants in society well. So we think that there is a demographic harm in order for the state to give them houses to be able to accept. So we think that people who does that in a non-legal way harm the state ability to help the immigrants that it already has economically and demographically. So we think that it can cause deterrence. Yeah, in the community, when you hear about someone who immigrated and you know he was held at the border, so it causes deterrence for people not to immigrate in a way that is not legal. We think that then we just need to divide between age groups, exactly like today in prisons, you divide between age groups because different age groups can get different deterrence, and we cannot harm kids the same way we give deterrence in prisons to old people. Before we continue, do I have POI from closing? Yeah, closing.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, closing.
Great, okay. So is there a basic level of human rights and dignity that even criminals deserve?
Thank you. We think that yes, there is. However, again, we think that we are not contributing a human rights violation in those borders. We don't think that's right. We think specifically when you're talking about families, there is a justification to divide between people. More I will talk about later. 3, a bit about like the mandate of the people. So we think that at this time, the enabling people to immigrate in a way that is not legal was part of Trump's reform and ideology. We think there are many people who voted for that ideology and gave him their mandate. We think that even the Biden administration, because it is under the democratic laws and the democratic ideas of the United States of America, is obligated to give this mandate to the people. Paying them settlements is changing all the reforms and harming the ideology that led the other administration to do those reforms. From all those reasons, very proud.
I thank the speaker for her speech and glad to call for the Deputy Prime Minister here.
Okay, I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. Look, I'll start with some rebuttal, and then I'll get to a few points. First of all, I want to explain why this is not a slippery slope, while this is a very specific event that happens, and we should therefore give refugees, they're not immigrants, they're refugees, specifically on this compensation. And secondly, I'm going to talk again why we think that we have a moral obligation and this benefits these families greatly. First of all, for some rebuttal, look, we have the fiat as open government to decide how we want to give them these settlements. We think that the settlements we gave are fair, are important. We do have this fiat. Moreover, they say the settlements need to be with agreement with what the harm that was done. Yes, and we're going to explain to you that the harm that was done was under every circumstances horrific violation of human rights, which I think that was pretty understood from Dwell's analysis, but if that's not, then we'll highlight that even more. Secondly, they say the money, we have obligation to give that money to our citizens. Well, we think that there's money that states such as the US, which are overall pretty rich states, can give, and it is for the better good if they do give for other states and for countries that have a lesser, were granted with less available resources and luck in the world, whether that is to poorer countries, which they often do, whether that is to civilians that need help, and a bunch of money just randomly like plopped up because we went out of Afghanistan. So I don't know, take some of that money and use it to help these poor little citizens. Secondly, we agree with them that thirdly, we agree that we aren't responsible for the refugees' initial state and how they became refugees. That does not mean that we should not take responsibility for the horrific crimes that were committed against them in these facilities, which again, I will highlight later, but we are not taking responsibility for these refugees, even though I'm sure that some of them were granted refugee and are in the States, and I'm happy for that. But we are giving them specifically on the crime that was committed here while they were captured and the way that they were treated in these jails. So, fourthly, this whole idea about legal social contract, there was no violation. Of course there's a violation. There's a violation, like I said, of basic human rights, okay? And let me get to that point right now. Why do we think that this is a violation of basic human rights? Because it was in every newspaper. It was horrific, okay? They showed pictures of kids behind bars without their parents, afraid, young children with no carers, no beds, nothing, okay? They barely had blankets there, okay? Can you imagine a kid that has just been like dragged across the border, God knows how he got there from this horrific journey, and the kid is now without his parents, he does not know, or she does not most likely know English, and they are in a jail by themselves. If that is not what we think is human rights violations, we don't understand what human rights violations is. We can make them child soldiers, that's another step, but we think that's pretty bad already. Secondly, okay, we think that just taking from a parent their child and having that parent worry about what is happening to the child is some of the most horrific psychological harm that you can cause a parent. None of us are parents now, so we can't actually understand this. We can just try to imagine it in our hearts, but seriously, if you imagine how much your parents love you and how scared they are when you were just, I don't know, got lost in the Pak Cha Swing for 1 second, imagine how scared and how horrifically psychologically damaging it is to know that you don't know where your child is. You don't know if they're back in Mexico. You don't know if it's safe. they're safe or not, how scary that is. Another reason why we think that this was horrific violation of human rights is that we think that they did not get good enough treatment in those facilities. Those facilities were not, they did not have enough money. The guards treated them horribly, and we have a lot of resources that tell us that. Also, they did not have beds, they did not have blankets, they were cold, and often they were sick. And we know that because this has come to the attention of the world, and this is specifically what happened there. And lastly, I'll say why I think that this is a horrible violation of human rights is because at the end of the day, they did not get the most basic legal rights that they were supposed to get. For months, they were in there. Nobody took care of them legally. Nobody explained to them what was happening. These legal things should have happened quickly, and they were dragged out. And even this, we say, is extremely not okay and is a human rights violation. So if Haifa wants to say that no social contract was violated, yeah, it was, with the world and with what we claim is socially acceptable to the world, okay? Lastly, they say that, look, immigrants, they had a choice. They could have decided not to come. Maybe, firstly, they're refugees. So like, I think their choice is somehow iffy. Like there's probably a good reason, but they hadn't. But that doesn't mean that you can torture them, okay? Like this case that they say, how they had a choice, says, oh, they had a choice, so we could have done anything with them. Why didn't we just sell them to slavery? They knew that they could have been sold for slavery, right? No, because there's basic human rights that they thought that they would be adhered to in a country such as the USA, which we highly regard as caring somewhat for human rights. So it doesn't matter if they had a choice, they shouldn't have been treated that way. And given all this together, we just say we have a huge moral obligation to help them. During that time, we hurt them. We took away their most basic dignity, and we cannot give it back 100%. But the best thing that we can do is give them dignity in the way that we can give them housing, money, ways so that they can live their life worry-free for however more years they have with their family in a safer place. That is the least that the states can do after they have caused them such grievous harm. That is moral obligation, and that is also, we think, the biggest benefit in this debate, because POI opening.
The children that were held won't get and profit significantly from the money anyway. Your parents.
No, of course they're getting. It's the whole families that are getting. That's ridiculous. Come on, it's the whole families that are getting. I don't understand. Okay, the families and the children. You know what? Give it to the children. Build them sandcastles. I don't care. It doesn't make sense. We're obligated to help them. We're morally obligated to give them good life. Give them the best schools there is. Send them to the best boarding schools. I don't care. These children deserve a good life after what happened to them. Okay. Lastly, we want to tell the following thing. We think that the benefits here are enormous for these families. Like we've explained, it is true that the U.S. has a lot of money. It doesn't matter how you say it. Yes, money can always be put somewhere else, but for these specific refugees, this money is crucial. It can do a huge change in their life. Lastly, why this isn't a slippery slope. Notice that this is a really once-in-a-lifetime event. It's true that refugees cross the border all the time. This does not mean we have to accept every refugee. I think some refugees should be accepted, some shouldn't. But when you specifically harm refugees by acting to them in such an unhumane way, in a way that you harm their most basic dignities and you do these things, you should pay them back, both morally and both because it is the right thing to do and the best benefit for them. We've shown you why you have to do this morally. We've shown you why it's just the best thing that can happen in this debate, that you actually help these families. This money, it means the most to them. And therefore, we have to do this. I'm very, very proud to propose.
I thank Dafna for her speech. I'm glad to call for the deputy leader of the opposition, Hil Hil.
Am I audible?
Oui.
Great. מכל השפות בעולם, זה מה שציפיתי. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. I think that one of the things that we should really look at is not just how we fix the past, but how we also affect the future, and how we also affect future generations, and how we also affect more immigrants that we believe that are to come to the USA, to try to come to the USA, and really suffer even more than the families that already tried in the past. This is why my case will be why we are likely to get way more new waves of immigrants tomorrow, why we are not likely to accept these immigrants, and why we are likely to keep harming them. Therefore, we get generally more harm, both for the USA and both for these immigrants. Before that, let's start with rebuttals. So the first thing that we hear that is the criteria from the very weird criteria from OG is that we should pay them because we cause them suffer. Note that we cause people suffer many times, but we don't always pay them settlements. For example, when we enforce the law and when we put person in jail, then we cause him suffer. But still, we don't pay him money for putting him in jail because he broke the law. Know that Inbal explains to you that these immigrants knew exactly what they are doing, and when they were trying to do so, they knew that they are going to break the law. This is why we believe that their metrics is in the first place simply irrelevant. Then we hear in a POI, but wait, what about some basic human rights or basic human basis of that we should care? We say that, look, yes, they were separated and it was very sad and they were imprisoned, but they did get their basic human life, yeah, right? Because Daphne is trying to paint some horrible image, but they did get food, they did get water, they did get treatments, medical treatment, etc. They wasn't in a dungeon or something like this. We simply think that the characterization is awfully not true. And we did care about their basic human rights. But then they tell us something like, look, the USA has a lot of money, hence if the USA has a lot of money, they are responsible for a greater good, not only for the USA or something like this. We believe that this is simply an assertion, right? We don't hear any explanation as for why is it true, right? We also believe that if you're looking at rich people, they don't necessarily have responsible for other people, etc. And if you do want to say it, then you have to analyze it and not just say that it is. Now let's go to my case. So we think that what's going to happen tomorrow is people are going to immigrate, way more people are going to try to immigrate to the USA. This is going to be a message case. Okay, sorry. So the first thing is what is the message that we are talking about? We are talking about a message that says the USA is more welcoming towards immigrants, and we specifically think that this more welcoming is not just a little bit more welcoming or a lot more welcoming, is just enough more welcoming for people to decide to immigrate. How does it look like? First of all, who receives the message? We think that we are talking about people from Mexico, etc. We think that any neighboring countries from South America. We think that we are talking about people that can reach the USA with ships and etc. How is this message is gonna deliver to these people? We think that simply once the government decide to pay these people this money, then it's gonna be through the media, through papers, through people that are talking about it around me. We simply are going to see in the media the fact that the USA now paid money paid the settlements for these actions. What do we think that these people, once they are watching the media or reading the paper or talking to their friends, and they read that the USA now paid for these actions, what is going to be the likely translation to this? How do they going to understand? We think that two things are going to happen. A, we see that the USA is now taking responsibility for the act that they did, for the separation. Secondly, we think that the USA confessing that the fact that they did it is wrong. They admit that they did a mistake by prisoning these people in the first place, because this is what it means that this is how it happened. So we think that both of these, the imprisoning, both of these analysis says that people are tomorrow going to think that the USA is likely to, because they regret what they did, are likely to act differently in the future. This means that if more waves or more immigrants are going to come, they won't act the same way because they just confessed that what they did was wrong. Therefore, we believe, so we say that they think that they are a little bit more welcoming.
I will be starting in 3, 2, 1. Okay,
So I would like to start by first of all agreeing with OG that it is absolutely the United States' moral obligation to fix this egregious violation of human rights. But in addition, it doesn't just stop there. Under the assumption that America is a logical functioning democracy, for extension, I'm going to say two things. One, this proves that America is in a critical crisis, a huge moral crisis that they need to fix right now. That's the short term. And the buck doesn't just stop there about righting this wrong, but they also ensure a more humanitarian world for the future. And that is exactly what this is going to do. And that leads into more long-term effects. But before that, a little bit of framing to kind of clarify the two clashes that haven't really been answered by top half, along with rebuttal. So, first of all, for rebuttal, we get a bunch of things. We're saying that these settlements is not going to improve their lives. It's not going to fix the problem. While this is true, this won't fix everything. It is impossible to get them to a better scenario without first righting this wrong. Unless there's compensation for this horrible violation of human rights, there's no progress that can be made. They also, the United States is not responsible for what happens in Mexico. This is true, but the United States is also entirely responsible for the terrible human rights violation that they did. And this is what we're talking about. This is the focus of the debate. This is what they're trying to correct, not their shitty situation in Mexico or any of these other things. So that should just be clear. Even conceded that even criminals deserve basic human rights and dignities that need to be protected. In this scenario, when minors were separated from their families, they were not. So that also builds into legitimacy of why we need to fix this. And then they have this weird claim that this money is kind of a reward because they get jailed and they get paid money for jail. No, this money is not a reward because the US put them in jail. This is a reward because the United States has wronged them and is now the moral obligation to do so. And the most, I think, flagrant thing that opening up gives us is that they're using this as a deterrent for more immigrants. If the United States is in a situation, this will build into my points, that they need a human rights violation or the threat of a human rights violation to stop immigrants from coming, then the United States is failing morally as a society that it props itself up to be. Okay. As OO says, we need to fix this for the future. I completely agree. The fact that the United States got into this situation means that it is in a huge crisis mode and it needs to fix its moral compass. And again, also fix things in the long term. So what are the two clashes that we aren't really sure of who wins this from opening half is, the case of money and if it's legitimate, and social contract, if it broke the social contract or not. Case I'm gonna get to in a second. As for the social contract, I don't think really it's relevant because even if they broke the social contract, they didn't. The point is the United States as the government still violated human rights, so it's honestly irrelevant. Okay, so now we're going to get the case of the precedent that this will set, and this will also get into the legitimacy of the money. So if these settlements are paid, this sets a precedent that this is what the American people want, okay? This means that future administrations, regardless of if Biden is reelected or not, which we don't honestly care about, will likely not reverse this action or repeat other offenses like this, which is what we really care about. Why is this likely? A, they've already invested money in righting this wrong. Even if America has the money every 4 years to put them in camps and then compensate them and then do it again, they won't. It's a terrible return on investment. The people are going to pay, and it's not going to happen. Why? Because who's in favor of paying the money to fix this? People who voted for Biden. Who's in favor of money for reverting this? No one, because liberals will not support it. Conservatives are concerned about money. So it's really unlikely that if we give these settlements, it will ever happen again. Okay. In addition, appearance. Politicians want to be elected or re-elected. So to some extent, they have to send a message of reflecting what does the people want. Biden was elected on the promise that he would reverse bad things that Trump did, including the separation of these families. So regardless of what happens in the next election or every election after that, this still sets the precedent that people do not agree with this. And it'll be even harder for someone to be elected or re-elected on a platform that they will continue terrible human rights violations such as this one. Okay. And now this is the fun part, and the fun part is the legitimacy of the money, because we had this whole debate in the top half about do we have the money, do we not have the money, should we get the money, should we not have the money. Point is, and the best part about this is this legitimacy of money, and if we get to spend it, if the United States gets to spend it, it doesn't come from me, it doesn't come from anyone else in the debate room, it comes from the people who voted. The people who voted for Biden, and they voted for Biden on the promise that he would do this. That means the majority of the American people are now giving this legitimacy. Ipso facto, there's now legitimacy to pay this money. So that solves that clash, that open half left open. All right, so now that we understand it is unlikely that this new policy will, revert to being reversed in more community rejections and then settlements, and we won't get into this vicious cycle of wronging rights and then paying them a few years later. Now let's get to the important point. Why is this affects the families that were affected positively, not just in the short run immediately, but in the long run. we lift this humanitarian roadblock, we fixed it, but we fix it for good. What does this mean? This leaves them not only in a world where this has been fixed, but this is a world where it's more humanitarian, safe for the future. It's less likely in the future that something like this will ever happen again. That leads the way for more progress to be made, for actual policies to be made to help these families, because we don't have to deal with fixing with the terrible shit that they did. And it's something it's not something I have to worry about. Instead, in our world, these wrong families now live in a better one. And as I said earlier, this burden has been lifted for good. I will take a POI from CO.
Most of the public, even the ones that I voted for Biden, doesn't want this kind of things. Most of them voted for him just because of COVID or health benefits or things like that. Nobody voted because they want this kind of thing.
I mean, that's just completely untrue. Most of Biden's platform was about reversing things for Trump. He passed a lot of administrative actions to reverse damages caused by Trump, and he made a lot of promises. Whether he's living up to them in his approval ratings, these are all things we can talk about later, has nothing to do with debate. But to say that he didn't promise this or that people didn't vote for that is just blasphemy. It's just not true, and you could look it up. It's huge. It's completely central to his campaign. So, out of time, to recap. While we agree that it is the United States' moral obligation to fix this, it's not just enough to fix it in the short term. The buck has to continue to ensure for the long term that things like this will not happen again. And I have proved and explained why, if the settlements take part, something like this is less likely to happen in the future. It also saves the United States from this moral crisis that has clearly entered and getting to the one where it's not failing in this moral compass, where the United States has to refer to threatening the violation of human rights and separating minors from their families in order to stop immigration, which we don't even understand is why the biggest problem in America right now. And so for those reasons, we are proud to propose. Thank you very much.
I thank the speaker for his speech and glad to call for the member of the opposition, Hill.
רגע, moment. שניונת. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Look, we all live in democratic countries, and we all when we think that the most important thing, the most important guidelines in those democratic countries is to fulfill what the public wants. And we think that eventually what the public wants is not to take care for the immigrants, especially when it's come over the benefits of the citizens of the US. And we think that this is one of the most important things in the debate. What I'm going to do is firstly to explain you why we think it is not actually what the government want, the public want, and it will be just with closing government. And secondly, I will explain far more than what we get from closing government, opening opposition on why there is no any commitment for those people, regardless of which administration we're talking about. And if I will add a bit more time, I will explain why it eventually will harm the immigrants in the future. So let's just dive into the point. So we think that, as I already given in the framing, democratic is to fulfill what the public is want. Because eventually the public is the one who's choosing the government, and in order to fulfill his needs and his basic and what is actually want. We think that this is one of the most important things in democracy, and this is one of the biggest guidelines. Why this is so crucial? Because we think that eventually if we will show you that this is not what the public want, we think that only on this, on what actually the public want, we need to win this debate, because we think that it's something that is so inherent in democracy in our world. We think that this is so important that it should be enough to win. So why we don't think that actually the public want it? First, we think that it's just cause for a lot of more immigrants. So Open Opposition gave this analysis a bit, gave an analysis about it, but you think they didn't take it to the extent of the idea that this is what the public want or not want. And we think that this is when we are giving you in this point, it means that it's more crucial in the idea that the public afraid from it and don't want actually that this will happen in the future more. But secondly, we think that the public actually afraid from the idea that immigrants will take their jobs. The immigrants afraid from the idea that maybe the neighbor that will be next to them will be some immigrant, even if it's not correct, even if it's not something that they don't, the fight is not real and there is nothing to be afraid from. The public in his eyes perceive those people as someone that they don't want to be next to them, and they are fighting on that they will eventually hurt them. Thirdly, although Trump was very extreme in his idea about the ideas on how you need to treat to immigrants, and he wants to be fence, on the border, it doesn't mean that the Democrats want to welcome immigrants in and open the border to all immigrants. We can show this in what is going today, that the status quo is not, it didn't actually change so much than what was when Trump started with all this idea. But what happened is that the numbers of immigrants was just fall down. So we don't hear about it now in the news, but the situation is quite similar to what was before. And we think that this is eventually showing you that this is not only what the public want, but what Biden wants. And fourthly, and important and very important as well, is that there are a lot of other problems in the US that are much further, much important than the immigrants, like the COVID, like the work issues that now a lot of people don't have. That are find themselves without jobs, and a lot of other things that are the public wants to see the government taking care for before the immigrants, and we think that this is what actually the public wants, because that eventually this is what actually the government should do to fulfill the public wants, the public will. This is why we think that why it's so important. But secondly, and second point on why we think that there is no any commitment for those immigrants. So we think that two main important things that are further what we got for Open Opposition. First, we think that the country has the ability to defend on herself. But like if we were taking, for instance, a war that two countries are fighting each other, we don't expect one country to give settlements for the citizens who hurt because in the war, because there was some situation of defending on the country. Before I continue in it, opening.
Okay, the most important thing in democracy is not to do what the public wants, because, for example, even if the public really, really wants to abuse minorities, that's just not okay. Basic human rights are more important. Okay.
So I will just talk about it now. So when I'm talking about the defense, so it means that eventually, okay, so we are not giving settlement when we are hurting someone in the war, and we think that eventually there are a lot of, in immigrants, there are a lot of problem that coming from it to the country as well. And what happened in this situation that Donald Trump decided on this situation was that there was a mass of numbers of immigrants that came simultaneously, and the government didn't have any other option to defend themselves, because it was so big and so and they didn't have the ability to prepare for it. But secondly, we think that the government have the ability to make איזון זכויות between a lot of other things like taxes, that we are expecting the government to help the poor by taking money from the rich. And we think that this is the situation, even it's much further more in this situation, because they are even not citizens of the country, and this is why it's just legitimate to do it. And because of all of this, please oppose. In 3, 2, 1. Two things we showed you in this debate. Both of them make us the win separately. First thing we showed you that the public doesn't want it. CG attacked it a bit, but not very good. I'm going to discuss it first. The second thing I'm going to discuss is about how when you're trying to defend yourself, sometimes unpredictable things happen, even if those things are kind of bad, and this doesn't mean that you have to give compensation to the people that these are the two things I'm going to talk about. All rebuttal is going to be integrated. So the first thing, what Roy brings is the fact that the state has an obligation to do what the public wants. Notice that this is something that didn't came from OO, because OO basically told us that the money has to help the citizens, but they didn't analyze what the country does a lot of things. It doesn't help the citizens directly, like giving money to Africa or things like that. But moreover, even if you think that it's similar, they never analyze why the public wants or doesn't want these kind of things. We did. Okay, so why does the public doesn't want? Well, it brings you a lot of reasons. Almost all of them are regarded in the same way with CG, and this is not enough. It brings you about how there are tons of crucial things in the eyes of the average US right now, like the fact that people are dying on the street from COVID, the fact that they don't have a lot of work, the fact that actually immigration and unemployment is kind of a problem in the US, even for the liberal people, meaning that they are not likely to be this kind of thing, meaning that even if back in the day when they voted for Biden, 2 years ago, and they thought, we should do this kind of thing, right now when the circumstances have changed, it's not the same thing. But what CG tells you about it? Why do we think that the public wants? They say the public voted for Biden, and Biden is super pro-immigration and good and things like that. Notice few things. A lot of the people that voted for Biden didn't vote because of immigration. I know, but the major ticket of Biden wasn't immigration. It was things like COVID. It was things like healthcare and the ways to with China or things like that. Immigration was a part of it, but even the part about immigration wasn't like I'm going to give the main part of it. It wasn't like I'm going to give a compensation for these kind of people. It was like things with the immigration policies of the US. It was we should accept more people from Arab countries and not prevent them from flying to the US or things like that. These are the main things that he had pointed from. And besides that, I think that a lot of people that voted for Biden anyway voted just because they constantly vote Democratic, just because they thought Trump was the worst thing in the world, not because of these kind of things. As we explained, all of his analysis applies to the average Democratic voter as well, meaning that without a refutation to that we didn't get from CG, and the point doesn't stand, meaning that the public wants this kind of things. Now notice that when the public wants this kind of things, it means that we should do it. This already wins CG definitely, and OO's main metric. I think it also wins OG, because if the public doesn't think the violation of human rights was so important that it should do this kind of thing, then we don't need to do it. I'm going to add one more reason as a rebuttal to CG. Even if the thing that the public wanted it back then, they don't want now to reverse one of Trump's decisions, because it's going to break the US voters even more, which is something that the public doesn't want in such crucial time as COVID. Let's talk about human rights violations, okay? Because this is the second question.
notice that both governments, even if you say horrible things happen, they are basically basing it on things in the media, which are usually the most extreme cases. But even if we disregard it completely, notice that they weren't comparative. Because what was the comparative? What was the US supposed to do when hundreds of thousands of immigrants or refugees came to them in such a short period? Notice that they didn't like have, if they needed to examine if they are actually refugees. They would probably put them in jail, probably separate the men, the female, meaning maybe less human rights violation would have happened. Maybe things would be slightly better. But it was a most surprising thing in the world. It was something, I don't know, it was something that is unprecedented. And the US, sorry, shit happens when you try to do things that you never done before. And yes, I'm sorry, this shit really helped a lot of people, but it happened. And as I explained to you, it's just like war. We are not expected to give money to people who broke the law just because we acted in a slightly better way out of mistake. We didn't act like on purpose. We didn't want to violate human rights. We just didn't know how to handle this kind of thing better. This is the UX, meaning that it doesn't really work. Now think about a person who goes to trial against a state and found innocent. This person suffers a lot of in the process. Suffers tons of times with his family, a lot of suffering internal and a lot of money waste on this case, a lot of time. Notice that we don't have to pay him severances because we accept that we have the right to defend ourselves. And in this right, we may be mistaken. Now, surely, we would love for this kind of human rights violation not happen. But even if it happens, then it doesn't mean that we have to give compensation to everyone. Let's talk about the OO and why we are about it. A few things. The claim about the contracts and things like that doesn't stand in front of government's strong cases about how the treatment of the government was unpredictable. We do when we say that because the situation was so unpredictable, because the situation was so extreme, then yeah, this actually then this proves that even if we did something like we broke some sort of contract, we don't have to pay this kind of severances. Also, the thing about the right of the people is better, I already explained, meaning we basically deal better with the government because even if we accept that we have some kind of moral obligation towards this kind of people, we prove to you why the moral obligation for the citizen is stronger and why the moral obligation for us to defend ourselves and to accept this kind of thing it makes this option sort of not we not need to compensate. Because of this reason, I call it to oppose. Thank you.